Um, this thing I wrote today, a little pastiche, it's for Steve. And I just want to say, you know, he's supported me, he's encouraged me, he's taught me stuff, but more than anything, he's a good friend. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks for that.
That's so sweet.
This is Good S, and it's got some music to go with it. So I thought I'd play some music with it. One by one, Martin opened the shutters of the clock tower, next to which was a second colonnaded building, a library, a museum, its white pillars gleaming in the sunlight like Hollywood teeth. He hurried up the steps into the museum entrance. And as the balloon's dark shadow passed over him, crouched between the bins below the portico of the museum, waiting for the noon high to subside. For the next 2 hours, Martin sat quietly as if illuminated, waiting for the cutler to arrive, listening to the braying of the men in the irritated square below, their harsh shrieking voices filling him with a dull fear as iguanas lunged across the steps of the museum. The museum guards, an uneasy alliance of economically inactive men and art students, had armed themselves with ancient clubs looted from the anthropology galleries and now stood anxiously at the entrance. He had argued that his mother's remnants should go to the National History Museum, but his attempts to communicate had failed, and the museum had offered generous compensations to build up further its collection of her works. In the sculpture room, Duchamp's glass construction on loan from the Museum of Modern Art reminded him of the ambiguous role he had established for himself with regards to his mother's memory. And why this crumbling building? After all, the hidden perspectives hinted at in Bergson and William James had provided the means to pump the British Museum Library into the world's largest hot air balloon. Martin showed his pass to one of the guards, custodian of this museum of wrecks. He hesitated there, like a son waiting outside a supermarket, as if testing the architectural structure of the pillared portico before climbing to the topmost walkways. He remembered visiting the Imperial War Museum with his mother and the pathos that surrounded what had taken place between them. Now, looking down at the decaying museum of perversion and possibility, he realised that the crushed cabin of his adolescence had also become a kind of private museum. Feelings of revenge animated him. He descended and photographed the massive chalk graffiti inscribed over the years on the walls of the museum lavatories. He was reminded of the private excursions he had made to the D-Day Museum at Arromanches, of a catalogue of an exhibition of tropical diseases at the Wakefield Museum, where he had read about the chemical and topographical analyses of a young woman's excrement, both augmenting a confused and half-conscious attempt to map an alternate history for himself. Outside, the sun's skull had disappeared as the balloon made its slow descent. Spectators frozen together like mannequins in a museum tableau. Late 20th century high-rise dwellers and early 21st century townhouse owners recorded the landing on their phones, oblivious of the garbage sacks piled high around them, an exhibition of their leavings, the detritus of failed supply-side interventions. Martin's last meeting with a friend in the Dali Museum at Figueras had seemed to confirm his suspicions of entropic decline. He had dropped the jar containing the fetus and in error turned into the museum restaurant, where life seemed to have stopped. Nothing had been moved for years, a dusty vitrine of half-eaten comestibles and stained crockery. They had moved in an abstracted way, like unwilling children dragged through the boring museums of the inside of their own heads. Next to the hypermarket, he had asked a passerby, "Is there another museum here with a collection of bones?" "It's difficult to be a relic," was the reply. And then, "Will you take this to the museum?" "No," he almost screamed. "Get rid of it. Bury it on the beach where it belonged." Now, at the far end of the Forgotten Museum, in a niche behind a fourth wall, he uncovered a small collection of abandoned artefacts, a greasy pair of his mother's sunglasses, soiled photographs of a handsome woman sitting stiffly in shadowy rooms, encyclopedia illustration of injuries suffered at Ypres and the Somme, a model of Montgolfier's balloon stolen from its display case in the Science Museum. He fantasised that his own death mask would become the centrepiece of such an exhibition. Outside, the concourse was surrounded by the V&A, the Royal Albert Hall, Waterstones, Peter Jones, the London Library, Legoland, all purveyors and exploiters of an unnatural and false teleology of consumption and growth. His mother had said, perhaps the future belongs to magic, and it's we women who, in a thin way, are like guides at a black museum. Martin remembered waiting in a high-ceilinged drawing room, looking out over the sea, as tirelessly she insisted on visiting every church and baptistry, every museum and cathedral. From now on it's going to be a lot harder, he commented when she returned. Martin, they're the wrong targets, she said. He realised that there was scarcely a city, museum or beach in Europe that he didn't associate with her. Later, back at his empty home in the suburbs, the nearby streets containing the houses of polished furniture which turned family homes into deserted museums with only a few partly colonised rooms where people slept alone, he could dream again of deserted museums, of desire without need,